I'd like to hand over to Leo now, who will just elaborate on some of those concepts.
Thanks, Marge. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko rewe take te maunga, ko awa karangi te awa, ko te upoko o te ika Maui, te moana, ko Leo McIntyre aho. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. The day that I went to work in a temporary position for Temp Solutions for the first time was probably one of the worst days of my life. And the reason for that was not that I was going to the job interview, it was what had happened just immediately before that. I walked out of a conversation with the people I was flatting with at the time, where they'd informed me that my behaviour and my self-care had deteriorated to such a point that they were no longer willing to live with me, and so they were throwing me out. So I went from that conversation somewhat tardily to the job interview with Temp Solutions, and sat down and told the unsuspecting Helen in rather too much detail what was happening for me in my personal life. To which she responded, "It sounds like you're having a really difficult time right now. Do you want the job?" And that was a stunning moment of revelation and change for me when she said those words, "Do you want the job?" Because it was the last thing that I expected her to say. I didn't go into that situation trying to set myself up to fail. It was simply the best that I could do in the level of distress and the difficult situation that I was in at that time. But the response to it was absolutely critical for the outcome and the things that followed. So the job that I took up with Temp Solutions at that time was to help organise a hui of people from around the country, mental health consumers who were interested in peer support, looking after one another and helping each other to get through the difficulties that they faced, and to create a national network of people who were interested in that and other issues related to the use of mental health services and of experiencing recovery from mental illness. So that was a fairly intensive few weeks of work. One of the most difficult things about that experience for me was the interactions that I had to have with the benefit system along the way. I had to negotiate very carefully with the case manager who was in charge of me, as it were, to ensure that I didn't end up in a situation where I owed a whole lot of money at the end of the period. As it turned out, that happened anyway. But the important thing from the point of view of today's discussion was the focus on the abilities that I had and the potential that I had, even in that moment of extreme distress that I was experiencing. And that was the flavour of Temp Solutions and the way that we worked from that point on. A few months later, the gentleman who was running Temp Solutions as the manager at that time resigned, and the job became vacant, so I applied and was fortunate enough to land the role. And so I began working part-time for Temp Solutions, but I never forgot that experience of where I'd come from and the importance that it had for me. And I was able to communicate that, I think, quite effectively to a large number of people as we worked with them over the ensuing years, that whatever's happening for you right now, whatever you think you are always more than that. And there will be better opportunities and better times ahead. And one of the critical differences that people have expressed back to us through the feedback that we received over that period of time was that the really important difference was that there's somebody who actually believes in my potential, even though I'm having such difficult times. And so that's one of the things that I would like to emphasise to the welfare reform group, is that essential turning points come, and particularly for people who are experiencing mental illness, when things are at their worst. And if the support is there and you can rely on that support for a period of time, I think this is one of the critical success factors that Temp Solutions had, was the ability for people to know and understand that if things became difficult, they hadn't committed to a long-term and an ongoing piece of work. And for some people that was a very difficult thing to do, and it's one of the reasons why people do stay on benefits for long periods of time. It can be a very discouraging and daunting prospect to put yourself forward to an employer that you're very keen to engage with successfully, and someone that you want to show your gratitude and your respect for the fact that they've given you employment, by remaining in that employment and being the best employee that you can be. And so people tend to be very heavily committed to working as hard and as well as they can. And often that can put ridiculous amounts of pressure on them, actually. It's very important to have good communication between yourself and your employer in that kind of situation. And the short-term nature of the work that we offered was very encouraging to people, because they could see a safe period of time that they felt they could commit to. And having committed to that and gone through it successfully, they were then empowered and enabled to go forward into larger and larger steps. And for many people that we worked with, that was how it went. Starting off with a few hours, a day or two, moving into a week, and further on into longer periods of employment, and then starting to seek permanent roles outside of the area of what we were able to provide for them. So I guess those are the main things really that I wanted to communicate today, is the importance of focusing on what people can do rather than what they can't do, and the importance of having a place to fall back on, or a retreat position if things do go wrong. Not to make that the focus, but to ensure that there is that level of support available to people. I think we get into some very dangerous territory if we're removing people from sickness or invalids benefits and presenting any kinds of barriers to them returning to that if things go wrong in their work as a result of their illness. I think that's going to make it very difficult for people to even begin to approach work. I guess the only other thing I would like to say is that I've been given to understand that quite a large proportion of the terms of reference for this welfare review reform group have to do with the issues of disability. And I'd really like to encourage the group to ensure that there's adequate representation from people with disabilities as the process goes forward, because that's something that's very often missing from these type of things. And especially true for people with mental illness and physical disabilities both, because that's a very common situation and something that is often misunderstood in terms of how it doesn't fit into the respective health systems. You're either in the disability camp or the mental illness camp, and if you can't access one of them, it's probably because they're pushing you from pillar to post. It can be an awful situation to be in, and I think that's something that really needs to be looked at as well. I think that's it from me.